Hello.
Hello, I was just introducing you and sharing your beautiful book I have right here, Women's Guide to Power. I feel it vibrate in my hands as I touch this bold red cover. And what's inside it is really red hot too. So I'm excited to chat with you today about the intersections of our work in the world and how these awarenesses, how what we've been uncovering, how this all plays together.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really, really happy to be here.
Hmm. Right. So I was watching your TEDx talk, and it's interesting timing because right now I'm doing a series here on Instagram Live talking about trauma and talking about how patriarchy stress disorder shows up for women, and particularly unpacking what I call prison guards. These are trauma defenses that fall into different categories depending on the intensity of that trauma response or stress response, ranging from appease, going to fight, flight, freeze, and then shut down and somatization, right? And today is the day when I will be talking about freeze. And of course, that is what you talk about in your TEDx talk. And here is the line that you said that really hit me. It's not just about the bad things that happen, it's about the beautiful things that never happen, right? And these are some of the costs of going into freeze. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. I also wouldn't feel right beginning to speak with you without acknowledging you and your work. What I feel is one of the boldest and bravest things that you've done that so many other people venturing into this territory kind of miss is the universality of this experience for women. And you come from a distinguished background, being educated, and can talk about trauma and stress and things somatic and nervous system that I cannot because I don't have that background. But what I got so excited about when I realized that you exist in the world is you're speaking so loudly and so articulately with the message that a woman going through this, a woman is not alone. Because I think one of the greatest tricks, I'm not saying it's intentional, but one of the greatest tricks that's kind of pulled on a woman suffering from the impact of patriarchy, which is all women, is that these symptoms, these problems are individualized and personalized and reserved for example, individual therapy. My psychological problem, I have trouble asking. Yes. I don't fend for myself. I freeze easily. Yes. I'm weak. Yes. I don't believe in myself. I don't stand up for myself. I don't ask for what I need. I hide. I hide when I'm hurt. I pretend I'm not mad. My problem. Ooh. And now I need to go talk about my parents, and I need to talk about and the thing is that you know this. You get a room with enough women. One grew up wealthy, one grew up poor, one was loved by her father, not by her mother, one was loved by her mother, not by her father. And yet, even the ones that appear different, the one damsel in distress and hyper independent, nothing in common, neither of them ask, both of them have trouble asking, and all of a sudden it's like so bold to call your book also Patriarchy, Stress Disorder, and your work to just call it out. It's not you, it's us. It's not me, it's us. And once the patterns are revealed, then we start being able to look in more effective places, right? Not like, why did I freeze? I mean, we're bringing up the subject of the freeze. There are so many costs, right? The bad things that happen, the good things that don't. Also, one moment of freezing, if it's not acknowledged that there is a patriarchal condition, a context in which women will freeze, then the individual woman will say to herself, I froze
Yeah.
and I suffered this consequence. This is
Yeah.
what happened to me. This is what didn't happen to me.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to 10 minutes later, 10 days later, 10 months later, punish myself for it.
Mm-hmm.
Compounding, I'm, again, not qualified to speak about trauma, but it feels like compounding the trauma through the self-attack. Why didn't I? Why am I so weak? What is it about me that makes, why can't I stand up for myself? And it ends up echoing through time rather than getting undone. And the doorway to that is acknowledging its universal context. And this is what you do. So I wanted to say that first.
Thank you. Thank you, sister. I appreciate it. And I am, yes, I'm happy that the universality is so resonant. Really, the most powerful and my favorite feedback that I've been getting from women around this conversation around patriarchy stress disorder has been, thank you for naming, thank you for giving words to what I felt my entire life, trying to figure out what's wrong with me. And I've been on this journey my entire life. My entire journey has been driven by the question of what's wrong with me. Hence 2 graduate degrees in psychology, right? That gives you a little bit of an idea of the dedication that I brought to figuring this shit out. And yeah, and the surprise discovery that the answer to the question has been nothing all along. Yeah. So universality, and the universality.
One of those features, and if we're talking about the freeze, like one of the observations that I made time and time again, especially because of the structure of the academy, the school that I run, for most of its life up until the pandemic, the nature of it were really live classes that were very demonstration and exercise focused. So we could all observe almost the physical, behavioral habit patterns of women over and over and over and over again.
Yes.
And one of the things that became very apparent very quickly, before there was even a philosophy around the school, just a desire to understand, was that, and we had men volunteer for classes, so we could do a lot of work with them, and also comparative work and seeing what and you could watch it like in a laboratory. What would happen? The moment that attention was put on a woman, she was questioned, even positively questioned, or put attention on a little bit heavier than was comfortable, energetically, her whole body would turn inward. Whereas the same thing that would, if you put a man in that same, the almost like 98% of the time, it would be outward. So what does that mean? A very simple example, an uncomfortable question or a compliment. What do you do for a living? We're play acting, right? We're play acting. And still the tendency, woman goes inward to find the answer. She goes, do you like having lots and lots of sex? Inappropriate question. Inward. What do I say? What do I do?
Yeah.
And the tendency for me is like, why are you asking? Attention out, right? And this is the thing that this tiny detail, unmissable if you're looking for it, but if you're not looking for it, almost impossible to notice, is the entire structure of how a power dynamic basically crushes a woman. What makes her freeze is that self-conscious, self-attacking, self-aware inward energy, when she is put on the spot, will compound on itself. So it's not just a question of catching her off guard and having her freeze. She will stay stuck there. And there's a long kind of understandable history to why we would do this. The entire system of reward and belonging has to do with moments where attention are on ourselves, how we look, how we sound, how we're being. And it's not so with men. It's how they're, little boys, what they're achieving, what they're, that outward inward thing ends up being very important in the context of something like the freeze.
Yeah.
So then, being just aware first thing, the universality, right? Being first aware in the moments of freezing, the moments after freezing, especially the low stakes freezes, being like, oh, I froze, my attention went inward.
Mm-hmm.
First, loosening the grip of that by completely releasing any self-punishment. Oh, this is part of the fabric of being a woman in the patriarchy today, and part of a woman of the pivot. The moment I notice, it's not my issue, I'm reweaving the fabric, this is just part of it. That does so much of the work. And then the second thing is starting to break the freeze by, especially in low stakes situations, a neighbor in the elevator asks an appropriate question. Really practicing in these small ways can be really powerful. And the kind of like somatic bodily freedom and expansion that happens when you say, why do you ask?
Yeah.
Small moments starts to reshape the landscape.
I love that so much, and it gives me chills. So I have had two strands of recognition listening to you. One has to do with PSD, one has to do with how therapists are trained. So, and how it all trails down to power. Very interesting. So about PSD and patriarchy stress disorder, for those who are not familiar, women have been conditioned. Well, women have had to survive, and to survive, we need to check ourselves. That's that inward attention. Like, I'm checking myself. Am I gonna say the wrong things? How am I gonna come across? Right? Is there gonna be an attack? Like, women are checking, and for men, they're not typically in danger. Yeah. So they're not typically in a state of survival. So they have the freedom to be outwardly focused. And I talk about this as the greatest privilege that men have under patriarchy.
Wow.
Right? Is that privilege to actually be safe. They're safe. And the culture believes them. They get that constant positive reinforcement on a lot of ways in which they show up, right? What they say, like they believe that's important, what they have to say. And that's so there is that. And then, so that's how like that power dynamic is set up. So there is such inherent inequality, not only because women have not had their rights, etc., like women's bodies have not belonged to us. Nobody has cared about what we've had to say, and more than that, it has been punishable when we spoke up, right? And the resulting differential in how we feel safe or unsafe, right? Male or female body, and people across the gender spectrum, right? That's kind of the basis of inequality there from the biological, physiological standpoint. And now thinking about how therapists are trained, that actually gave me pause and gave me like, gasp. So therapists are trained to ask questions, to be outwardly focused. And I used to say, like, you can't win with a psychoanalyst because they're always going to put it on you. Like, oh, what made you ask that? Oh, what made you feel that? Oh, how did your mother mess you up, right? and unfortunately, like, sadly, there is re-traumatization that happens in therapy through this power differential, and it kind of compounds when a woman who is already carrying PSD in her system, and she comes to a therapist who is also unconsciously perpetrating that power, right? And not giving enough space for her power. I feel the purpose of healing is helping humans reclaim their power. And so you just helped me realize, like, my core issue with therapy when that power is practiced unconsciously, right?
Right, 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 right. I mean, this reminds me of some of the studies they did around women and confidence, like the Estes study, when
Mm.
not the parts where women rated their competence way lower and men rated their competence way higher than the actual test results, but the part where if a woman was asked how well she thought she did, her self-assessment went all the way down. And if a man was asked how well he did, his self-assessment went all the way up. So just the question, how well do you think you did, would make a woman crumble, and a man. So if you're now I'm thinking, like, if you're talking about the dynamic with a therapist, if they're not conscious of what even so why do you think you did that, woman? I don't know, it's probably because I'm screwed up. Why do you think you did that, man? Like, it might have a different impact. Also,
Ooh, interesting.
yeah,
Yes.
and that whole one of the, I mean, this isn't in the book and I don't really mention this, but I did a pretty exhaustive study of cult leaders at one point in terms of power dynamics, because it's sort of feeling like there's aspects of the gaslighting of women that's cult-like, and they use this. So in a cult, the first thing they do, but they use it coupled with shame. Like, if you have a question like, why do we have to kiss the ground 50 times and pray? The first thing they do, and this is an exact ironclad pattern, is question you for having that question, right? And couple it with shame. Are you resisting? Do you have an issue with this, right? This is how they completely quash dissent.
Ah, I'm getting hot. Yes. Oh, and this gaslighting coupled with shame, right? Because that's kind of the core of gaslighting, making you wrong. Whatever you think, whatever you feel, you're wrong. You're making this shit up.
Yeah.
Your reality is invalidated, right?
Yeah.
And how that's used throughout patriarchy and, of course, in cults. Wow.
Yeah, and it doesn't really take much. It doesn't,
Yeah.
this is one of the things that, one of the most rewarding things about the work I get to do is all of the low-hanging fruit, like all of the easy wins. Because so much of this lives in a very thinly veiled shadow of assumption. A lot of the things, like the making oneself wrong the moment someone asks a question, the woman's tendency to be like, why did you do that? I don't know, maybe because there's something wrong with me. There's a whole category of things that live in that thinly veiled shadow that once you see it, it's the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins. One of them is a lot of women have difficulty asking for what they want and need. But if you have a woman, this is the asking practices in my book, if you have a woman, as an assignment, write down 20, 50, 100 things she could ask, specific things of specific people, and not ask, right? If she's just aware of, starts using her imagination to start looking at desires, needs, people, coupled in sentences, what starts to happen is the woman's oftentimes destructive self-negotiation thing, like negotiating against herself, actually starts to work in her favor. When she uses 100 things that she could ask but isn't, she will automatically start asking without any effort for some of the things off that list. It'll just happen by itself. And there's a lot of things like that, because when we look at it consciously, first thing I said, which is why I love you and adore you, is making this universal, right? Because that's the first key. Once we start looking at this as not our own individual problem, it becomes so much easier to see, like, oh, if she's not asking, these are all the things I theoretically could ask for, but put no pressure on myself to ask. All of the sudden, the world starts looking different. Freezing. The moment we start taking it out of the realm of personality, personal, I'm not confident, I don't love myself. The moment we take it out of that self-attack, right? That voice that you
Mhm.
talked about, that self-monitoring, self-policing. Is my skirt too short? Am I in danger? Am I? Once we start looking at that voice and not making ourselves wrong for it, not attacking ourselves for attacking ourselves, it in of itself, once it's a little bit separate and seen as universal, we can speak back to it. We can say, actually, I am not only competent, I am a badass when it comes to this. I'm like, oh, that's silly. Why would I slap my own hand for putting the toothpaste cap wrong? I am, fabulously messy, or whatever the case may be. So,
What I really loved, I just wanted to emphasize in what you said, making these lists of questions, right? The way we approach working with patriarchy, stress disorder, other traumas, because essentially trauma is an experience that made you feel unsafe, that overwhelmed your resource, it made you feel unsafe, and then created either physically or emotionally unsafe, and then created trauma adaptations going forward to keep you safe. And some of those adaptations are not speaking up, is holding back,
right.
is having that inner talk. All of those adaptations are meant to keep us safe. So in healing trauma, we help to reestablish safety, right? By working with the nervous system, embodied safety, not only safety
Yeah,
here,
yeah, yeah.
but safety in here, right? And I so love your practice of writing down the questions, because preparation goes a long way in establishing safety.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Mm,
I can see that.
yeah. Not it can also, like in some situations, like women can be over prepared and get stuck in endless preparation without making a move. For example, somebody who's already overeducated, no, I need to read 10 more books before I can give a talk,
Yeah,
right? That kind of a thing would be an example of a trauma adaptation. I call them prison guards, that's keeping you stuck. But the preparation that starts with making the invisible visible. Okay, when
yeah,
I freeze, I can't find words.
yeah,
But why is that? Because I don't know what to ask? No bullshit, I do. And preparing,
yeah, yeah.
right? So when you come, it's kind of ingrained. It's already in your body. It's already on the tip of your tongue. Oh, right?
Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
made you ask? Like therapists get trained in that. I never realized that was my competitive advantage in some ways.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I discovered the power of that working as a dominatrix. It's
Mm,
it's essentially the sessions are generally an hour long, like therapy, and
mhm.
they're mostly based on language. A lot of people who don't know what a BDSM session looks like, it's mostly talking. And it's mostly the dominatrix talking. And what is she going to say? There's a man on his knees. What is she going to say?
Made you a great public speaker.
Oh, she's going to ask questions, right? You like being on your knees, don't you? What are you doing here? Did I see
Mhm.
you? Was that resistance? Did you look at me? And eyes on the floor. Why did
Mm.
you do that so slowly? It's just constant questioning. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Like it trains that ability to really see somebody. And you know what? It's very interesting because when you truly see somebody, when that somebody feels truly seen, it actually makes them feel very safe.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
right. And then,
yeah.
and when we feel safe, we can experience pleasure.
Yeah, that's
That,
true. That's true. That's
that's
right.
amazing.
Yeah.
You know, I've been so fascinated with the whole like what it feels like, right, to be a dominatrix. Would love to just like understand that internal experience a little. And there's a funny anecdote from my own life trajectory. The road's not taken. When I was just setting up my private practice in New York City, I got an email from someone that read along those lines. you know, I've heard that therapists can be very strict. And I've been a really bad boy and I deserve punishment. I was wondering if I could book an appointment with you and compensate you, you know, at the rate of $400 an hour. And I was like, shit, like, the road's not taken, right? Like, I was like, seriously, like, that's I didn't end up taking that offer, but it still gives me like a good a good pick me up. Like, there is always, if all else fails, right? There are so many paths to have fun and bring value.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's, yeah, it can be an amazing feeling. You know, I was still thinking, like, we've been exploring the subject of over preparation at the academy, and the one of the things that we're finding is that if a woman prepares to, instead of preparing to do a good job, prepares to have a great time.
Ooh.
So in advance preparing to have a pleasurable experience,
Oh.
handles doing a good job inside of it, tends to temper the kind of over preparation that creates anxiety. And that's been really fun, because that just came out of a course that we finished teaching on confidence a week ago. And it was just like this kind of spontaneous discovery, because the subject of over preparation and confidence, you know, they go together.
Oh, hell yes. I love that, when you're preparing to have a great time versus, so again, that if you remove that self-evaluation, am I doing a good job? Am I not? But instead, you, like, you know what having a good time
Yeah,
feels like in your
it
body.
also flips who's the center of the experience, who the experience is for. Even if I'm giving a speech, like, if I'm preparing to do a good job, I'm only thinking about their evaluation. If I'm
Yeah.
preparing to have a good time, I'm preparing to, for my, I'm central to the story, you know. and it has the effect of, if somebody's having a good time, they tend to be contributing,
Yeah.
you know, more than just their work, but their love, their passion, their joy, their good energy.
Yeah.
Their nervous system is at a place that they're less likely to feel attacked, more likely to collaborate, play. We could really use that right now. I think all of us on the planet right now could use a more playful, even though it
Yeah.
might sound self-serving, but preparing a day, a life, every task as a way to have an enjoyable personal.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I love that so much. And I just want to check in with you. Do you have a cutoff? Because I could keep talking to you forever, but I also want to be mindful of the time.
I don't have a hard cutoff time.
So if we roll for a few more
Yeah.
minutes, you're good. Okay, awesome. I'm really really want to talk more about power and unpacking that. I've been exploring this in a whole new way in my own life and practice, and understanding that I did not used to understand what power was and how it felt. Of course, in the systems of oppression, power is power over
Yeah.
somebody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have more power, somebody has less power.
Yeah.
And like, you know, that's the whole messed up view on that. And maybe that is like part of how it can play out, but maybe it doesn't have to.
I
And
don't
so
think.
I recently had an experience that showed me a whole different dimension of power. So I recently started working with horses. Horses are big animals, over 100,000 pounds. And if you try to like force them into something, you'll quickly understand that that kind of power does not work. What works is the power of connection to yourself, connection to your body, connection to your intention, and connection to the horse. And so I was in a round pen with a horse that's called at Liberty. So there were no like lead ropes or anything. So the horse is there, I'm there. Um, and she is a really big alpha mare, like, and she knows it, right? Of course. And I'm tasked with asking her to move around, right? To start walking and running. Um, and And my trainer is like, go ahead, make an ask. And basically communicate your intention, communicate energy. And I go communicating. And she's like, she doesn't move. And then I tap in there a little deeper and I go like, and she's like, nothing at all. And then he's like, what are you feeling right now? What are you feeling in your body? I'm like, well, I'm feeling frustrated. Like, I'm feeling ineffective. Like, nothing is happening. And he's like, gather everything that you're feeling and like really go there. I gathered everything that I was feeling that actually required a lot of vulnerability. And I dropped into a deeper level of conviction, a deeper level of I'm going to make an ask from a deeper place and bring out more of my power. And I did. And she started going, like, I'm going fast. And she was a little pissed because I brought so much energy. She's like, I didn't really want to do it, but okay, I'll play. And what I realized from that experience, it was very eye-opening how vulnerable it felt to go into my power. It was vulnerable. That was not something I knew about. I thought, well, vulnerable is when you cry, or vulnerable when maybe you allow others to see you in your like weak moment, or even in your anger. But the vulnerability and power, that was completely new to me and completely shifted my relationship and understanding of what that is. So I would love to hear you speak about your experiences with power, right? And how, like, if you've come across this power vulnerability dynamic.
Yeah, so there's a lot I want to say. First, just to acknowledge that working with horses, I don't think there's been a class at the academy where one student didn't have a breakthrough or a story about understanding true power and communication through an experience with a horse. The body, the human body doesn't lie.
Yeah.
But we can be disconnected from it.
Yeah.
And animal bodies are not disconnected from it. Yeah. And the fact that a horse is so huge, right?
And they don't bullshit. They don't make up stories.
No. Yeah. And actually, if we really closely examine how human bodies, in the most subtle form, it's the same thing. So you talked about this feeling of vulnerability when it comes to accessing the kind of power that would have a horse, almost like
I thought I was going to die. And that's ironically, right? Or maybe not ironically, we all teach what we're here to learn. Like, I'm my own like student who is like catches up to the content like 2 years into me teaching it. Like, I'm like, oh right, that's what it was about. So I'm yeah. So, but ironically, that's what I talk about, like patriarchy and like a woman's relationship with her power. It does feel like mortal danger, us stepping into our power.
Yeah.
The trauma all along. But for me, like experiencing that actually was very eye-opening, right? Like I'm gonna die literally if I go and reveal my true power in this moment.
Yeah, and I think anytime, and I'm sure you've seen this too, anytime we start moving closer and closer to describing the experience, the embodied experience, the experience of the body, suddenly language becomes slippery and tricky, right? So what's vulnerable, what's because we have a lot of ideas, and
Yeah.
the feeling is the feeling. You can have the feeling without knowing how to describe it. So one thing is that the almost linguistic assumptions about power and being in control, being in power, have a tensing quality. Have like a, I am going to, squeeze my fist until my knuckles turn white,
Yeah.
right? And our ideas about power on a bigger scale in political realms,
Yeah.
in terms of economics, mirror that mental assumption that's absolutely false.
Oh,
So, so like the way you can't bullshit a horse, you also can't bullshit reality for very long, right?
yeah.
So a tyrant, a dictator, right,
Yeah.
uses the white knuckle force to oppress the
Yeah.
people, right? It's not power, but because of how we think about things, we might say that that dude has all the guns and all the money and is shooting people and owns everything. But we all know that the greater the tension, the more fragile and temporary that power structure.
Ooh, yeah.
The people revolt and another one takes its place. And like it just, the cycle continues. So when we talk about power, I think one of the fundamental misunderstandings we have is basically what power is. And I'm not talking about the true power is actually a soft, loving power. I mean, cold, hard reality. It's not effective. It's not powerful or energy efficient to oppress a nation as a tyrant. It actually doesn't. So having power over another human being with force, manipulation, shaming, right? What that does is the person you have power over, just like the people you have power
Yeah.
over, are not at liberty to share their deepest resources, their talents, their passion. They're not
Yeah.
actually on board.
Or,
It's
or
just,
oppressing, or oppressing women through patriarchy, or
yeah.
oppressing people of color through racism and control.
And in terms of just the cold, hard definition of power, the oppressor is depriving him, her, their selves, as well as the rest of society, from the resources that would be available. So it's actually not powerful. Okay, so back to the horse, right? Back to the horse. So that feeling of vulnerability or that feeling of mortal danger, your territory, trauma, stress, reaction, like what is this? But also to be in a powerful communion as a top with an animal, as someone in charge, right? Requires connection to oneself, right? And again, these words are so slippery because it's like pop psychology, how it requires a complete circuit of energy so that you are the energy is moving through you into the horse, into you into the people you're leading, you into the submissive that you're dominating.
I love the circuit of energy as a
you as a
tangible.
parent, as somebody who's in charge, right? And like the reality is that we do occupy poles of power. We are students, sometimes with a teacher, and sometimes we're the teacher with the student. They're, the misunderstanding around power is that anything that's not alive with the current of energy, with the life force, anything that's not alive is not powerful. Like you have to plug something into a wall to get the electric current. So that feeling of like,
oh, fuck. This is so good.
So when there's power, there's connection, right? And
anything that's
again,
not alive is not powerful. And I just want to just make that connection to freeze, right? When we're disengaged, when we're not in our body. Oh, so good. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was a really good moment to take. I'm now feeling it. The pantomime of power, those artificial structures, the performance of power, that's not alive. All we have to do is have eyes to see how that does not work. It's not, it doesn't last. It doesn't work. The feeling of you could say vulnerability, you could say nervous aliveness or newness of being powerful in a position, in a top position.
Realness. I love realness.
Yeah,
Right?
it's not that
A lot
different
of
from
this.
being in the opposite position. You know, when you open yourself up as somebody who's following, you know, one may be more accustomed to one position or the other, but both require connection.
Oof, yeah.
Both require that current. And it's that where that's the moment where like the synergy happens and the magic happens, where you're having a psychic experience with a horse, or you're, you know, two people coming together are able to create far more than 1+1. It's because
Yes.
that current is there. And sometimes that means one person's in charge, one person isn't, right? Like,
Oh, sometimes it's like a figure eight, right?
yeah,
Pass it back and forth.
yeah,
There can be a lot of power inequality. I think that this kind of power is so not commonly practiced in our society. What power inequality actually looks like when we like, okay, you lead, I lead,
yeah,
we like there is that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's in some ways it's maybe getting worse on a bodily level. I'm not sure. It's hard because people aren't even making eye contact. You know, you have to like
Hmm.
send cues, receive them, really be present with somebody. And
Oh gosh, I don't want to end on this note. But yeah, I mean, the reality is that there is so much disconnection and trauma. This is actually one of the symptoms of trauma. Disconnection is one of the telltale signs of trauma. Be disconnection from yourself, parts of yourself, your wholeness, disconnection from the world, from the other. And the pandemic really has brought up so much intergenerational trauma. It has brought up so much. It has been so traumatic. I don't think we're even beginning to understand how it has deeply impacted us on a physiological level and what it means. But again, like not wanting to leave it off on like a depressing note. So let's talk about how people can come out and play, right, in restoring their power, reconnecting to themselves, how they can play in your community, where they can find you, and yeah, how they, yeah, what breadcrumbs can we leave for people in terms of that discovery, rediscovery of themselves and their power?
um, I don't know what to say right now. What would I mean? You know, okay, so riffing off the pandemic, one of the best things
Yeah.
that's happening with this like excruciating sensitivity that a lot of people are experiencing is like a path to embodiment and a path to feeling. And you know, coming out of this time period, you know, especially like women learning to trust what they feel, the uh, extra edge of pain and fear or attention. In a lot of ways, we have a leg up on the men who are conditioned and trained to not feel in a way that presents an advantage. I think this going forward, you know, between what's happening to the planet, the body of the earth,
Yeah.
between what's happening with technology, uh,
Mhm.
there's a counter pull, and I think women are the pioneers, the frontier of that counter pull of like
Yeah.
being in the body, of feeling, of trusting nature and natural processes by trusting what the feeling sense internally says about any decision, mundane or profound. And there's been this really strong split between self-development and activism, right? I'm doing something to improve my
Yes.
life, or I'm doing something to improve the world. To improve the world,
Yes.
I sacrifice. To improve my life, I'm being selfish. Here, we stand at this wonderful, fruitful, like a
Yeah.
crux, right? You listen to yourself and your body, right? To make the mundane or selfish or selfless decision. Doesn't matter, right? Because the moment we do that, we are remaking culture, we are influencing other women, and we're making decisions that are more in harmony with what what is needed all around. It's this wonderful practice of caring for oneself and everything at the same time by listening to the deepest parts of ourselves. So, you know, I think that's like one of the most beautiful discoveries, the collapse of selfless and selfish, that those two distinctions don't exist if you're embodied. It only exists if you're disembodied. If you're half out of your body, you can, you know, you can be greedy and never satisfied. But if you're in your body, you get full, right?
Oh.
So, you know, on that, on that note, if anybody listening is interested in hearing more about the exercises or games I would suggest to explore living from an embodied way and pretty shamelessly occupying your own power, you can read my book, Unbound, or go to our website, weteachpower.com, that has tons and tons and tons of resources. You can spend 50 days there picking things to try, things to do. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating few decades for humanity, and women occupy a very, very, very important part in that. And I feel very, very, very honored that you invited me to speak with you.
Oh, Kasia, I feel the same way. And I feel very grateful to women who have been in our communities and have been tagging us in each other's posts and shares and saying, we want to hear you two in conversation. What a gift. What a gift. I could talk to you for years, and I hope we will. And yeah, and it's such a perfect time to have this conversation. We'll reshare it if you've missed the beginning. Will be shared probably on both our channels. And I'm sharing on my channel right now a series on trauma reactions, adaptations. And today, later today, I'm going to be talking about freeze. Yeah, it's just, it all comes together so beautifully. And I love what you said about this collapse of the delusion of the selfish and selfness, that it only holds whatever truth when it's external. And it reminds me of a quote from a French philosopher whose name escapes me right now, who said, we only need morality because we cannot love.
Oh, wow.
And to me, that is that ultimate bridge, right? Morality is something like external, do this, do not do this. But when you love, when it comes from a deep embodied place, you can do no wrong. So that's
really moving.
That's power, right? That's power. So thank you so much for this. I look forward to more opportunities to play together.
Thank you so much.